then you turned your microphone on.
Welcome to Notary Essentials. When you finish the course, you'll know still have time. The laws allow you to do divided into several classes. The first time in the course, the next is it will teach you about leading to the
There, I'll turn your mic on. All right, guys, so while we're getting situated, just take your time. We'll start here in a few minutes, but I'm just going to wait. Amy said that she has a meeting that was running late, so she'll probably be joining via Zoom, but doesn't know exactly the time, and we're just still waiting for Dr. Karin to join us, so she'll be giving us a presentation here in a minute. But once we get started, it's going to be a little different than the meetings we've had previously because it's a hybrid, so just bear with us if we run into any technical issues, but I don't think it should be too many issues, but we'll get started in a minute. Hey, Karin, this is Zach Beck, just checking to see if you can hear me.
Hi, Zach, I can hear you.
Wonderful. So you're here? Perfect. Perfect. So, hey, all right. Welcome. Thank you to be here. So with that being said, we'll get started here in just 1 minute. And then when you're doing your presentation, if for some reason you have any issues with sharing the screen, let me know because we can run your presentation through the computer and council chambers, whatever works better for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, I would like to share my screen if that's okay. And then my colleague Jane, whom I will introduce in a second, she would also like to. And there she is. Hello.
Perfect. Well, that sounds great. Jane, welcome. Glad to have you here. We'll do formal introductions here in just 1 moment, but we'll get started with the very beginning roll call and then kind of get some of the other material matters out of the way, and then we'll jump right into it. But Jane, glad that you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Right. Zach, sorry, just to add, Jane will also have to share her screen if that's okay.
Perfect. Yeah, that totally works. Sounds good. All right. Oh, All right, so call this meeting to order of the Independent Redistricting Commission. And right now, let's do a quick roll call. Commissioner Reyes, Commissioner Vice Chair Jurgensen. All right, Chair Case, Commissioner Saldana, Commissioner Reynoso,
Present.
Commissioner Clemens.
Present.
All right, and right now, Commissioner Amy Dowen is currently absent, but she's planning to attend in a little bit. So first order of business is oral communications. We haven't received any requests from the public. Rick, do you have anything you want to speak about at this time? No, anyone on Zoom who's joining us, Ryan, Linda, or Raymond, do you have any oral communications that you'd like to share? Hearing no answer, I think we'll be good on that. So we can just kind of kick over to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. That was included in your agenda packet that I emailed to you guys a little while ago. So you can just let me know if you have any questions. I can make any modifications as necessary, but basically you can just take a motion in a second and vote whenever you'd like.
I'll second.
Great. All right, so we've got a motion and a second. We'll do a hand vote right now just to keep it simple with the system. So just all in favor, raise your hand, please. All right, motion approved, 6-0, and Commissioner Dow is out right now. So now we're going to kick it over to the redistricting workshop, and this is what we're all here for. So as previously mentioned, Dr. McDonald is here along with Jane, who's her associate, and they're going to walk us through a presentation today about the districting process. So with that being said, Karin, thanks for joining us. Feel free to take it from here.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me? Fantastic. I can see myself twice. Okay. Zach, I do not have screen sharing privileges right now.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can get that to you.
Thank you.
All right, should be allowing you to do it now.
Yes, I think so. So just one moment, please. I will share. And can everybody see my screen?
They can, but I need to switch the input on our side here. Let me make sure. Hey, Jorge in the back. Quick question for you. Can you hear me? I'm going to step back.
Yes.
Do you mind? It looks like we're having some trouble getting the shared screen to pull up onto the commissioner's computer screens. Would it be possible for you to assist with that?
Yeah. Oh, I see what you got. Okay. We may have to switch to the staff table. Unfortunately, it looks like. Let me try this. How about, let me try that. How about now? You should be able to have access to it now.
Yeah, why don't, let's see. Karin, do you mind trying to change one of the slides? Yeah, it looks like it's working. Perfect.
Great.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, should I get started?
Please, sorry about that.
Totally fine. And thank you so much, everybody, for inviting us to be here tonight and to talk with you about redistricting and criteria, data, and processes. I would like to start by introducing my colleague, Jane, who will do part of this presentation toward the later part of this presentation. Jane has been working with me since I met her at Tufts University, where we were both at a voting rights workshop. I taught there, met Jane. She came back to California right thereafter and then started to work with me at the statewide database. And then shortly thereafter, she started working with me at Q2. So I'm very happy that Jane is going to be working with me on this project. And I look forward to all of you having the opportunity to get to know Jane also. So she will be doing a lot of the technical work on this project. And well, we all look forward actually to meeting you all in person. So with that, I am going to go to my next slide. And also I should say we are sharing this presentation also with Zach, who will be taking over some of the timeline slides at the end of the presentation. So this is our roadmap about what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll talk just about general redistricting, give a little introduction, then we'll talk about the laws that govern redistricting. And at this point, I should remind you that I'm not an attorney. And so I do not pretend to give you legal advice. But as you probably know, this is a very heavily inundated with laws and decisions field. And so one pretty much doesn't get around to talking about laws. And otherwise we would not be able to do this work. Then we'll go about redistricting. We go on to redistricting criteria. Then we talk about which data are used to measure these criteria. And then we'll talk about a project timeline. And somewhere in there, Jane will do a live presentation of a line drawing tool. So I'm looking forward to the next couple of hours with all of you. And I think we'll probably find some time to stop for Q&A, and there will definitely be quite a bit of time at the end for Q&A, and we're happy to go back in the presentation, of course. So let's start with the basics. You all remember that Escondido went through a districting not too long ago. And I thought it might be good to talk about what the difference is between districting and redistricting, in particular, since you, the commissioners, and we, the staff and the consultants, are not the only ones that are going to be watching this presentation. It will be available on your website, of course, so that everybody can come up to speed on some of this terminology. Districting is the process of creating districts where there were none before, and that pretty much summarizes it. You went through a districting process when you were prompted under the California Voting Rights Act to do away with at-large election system, and start electing your city council members by district. So you, until then, had no districts, no city council districts, and the districting process established the first set of city council districts. So redistricting is the process of adjusting the existing district boundaries. So we're now done with the districting piece, and now we're going to the redistricting piece. So you're adjusting the existing boundaries, and this usually happens every 10 years after the release of the decennial census, because we need the data from the decennial census to equalize the populations in the districts. The decennial census is, of course, taken in the year ending with 0. And you all remember Census Day was April 1, 2020. And of course, that went a little sideways on all of us because of COVID and so far, and so on. But basically, generally, April 1 in the year ending with 0 is Census Day, when the decennial census is collected. Redistricting provides an opportunity to bring the existing district into compliance with all the redistricting criteria. So it's not just that we are waiting for the decennial census data to equalize the populations, but we also have an opportunity to look at the other criteria that govern redistricting. And then again, as I said, every 10 years, you have an opportunity to go through this process and then just make sure that everything is still okay. And it's California, things change. We are very mobile, we're very diverse. Things change a lot in California over, between censuses. So this gives an opportunity to take a look at all of the criteria, make sure that the criteria are still being followed, and also to see whether there may be some, voting rights concerns or so forth. Also, in the last 10 years, actually much more recent, the laws have changed in California, so local redistricting has been affected. So this is the opportunity to take a look at all of that. So here are the laws that govern redistricting. Basically, we start with the US Constitution, and that is generally where you find population equality, but also some other pieces that govern redistricting. There's federal law, by which we usually mean the Federal Voting Rights Act. And please just make a note that there are two voting rights acts that are currently frequently confused in California, because we also have the California Voting Rights Act. So the FVRA, the Federal Voting Rights Act, is really what governs a big piece of redistricting. The California Voting Rights Act is the law that governed your districting process. So essentially, when you switched from at-large to district elections, you did that under the California Voting Rights Act, even though there were also some aspects of the Federal Voting Rights Act involved. But once you're in redistricting land, you are not looking at the California Voting Rights Act anymore. You're firmly in Federal Voting Rights Act land. Then there's the California Election Code, and what's new there is the Fair Maps Act. And we'll talk about that in a little while, a little bit more. And then there are some additional requirements in Escondido, and these are pretty significant requirements, and that is, of course, your 2013 consent decree. And I know you have all seen it, and it's on the website, and we'll be talking about this also. So why is my map not moving? There we go. Okay. Wait a second. Yes. Okay. So let's start with the California Fair Maps Act really quickly. This is a quick overview. So Fair Maps stands for Fair and Inclusive Redistricting for Municipalities. So that's your fair and political subdivisions. So that's Fair Maps. For general law cities, you will want to refer to Elections Code sections 21600 through 21609, and also 21620 through 21629. It was passed and approved, and then approved by the governor in October of 2019. So this is a very new law. And what it did, it created a state mandated local program, and it also explains the required processes for local redistricting. So it's actually very detailed. The California Fair Maps Act hearing requirements are as follows. You must first hold 4 public hearings for input on the districts. There's at least 1 before the council draws a draft map. Then there's 2 after the council has drawn a draft map. And then at least 1 on a weekend or 6 p.m. on a weekday. And then the meeting requirements are they must be accessible. Meetings must be accessible to people with disabilities, and you must provide live interpretations for non-English language speakers. California Maps Act has outlined various criteria, and essentially it starts with exactly what we mentioned earlier in our opening slide about the laws that govern redistricting. So it's basically mentioned in these redistricting guidelines. So one must comply with the US Constitution, and that generally means, equal population and so forth. Then also the California Constitution and the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is again the FVRA, and we'll explain a little bit more later. But just in order of importance, here are the criteria that the Fair Maps Act mentions. And if you've read your consent decree, then you will actually be reminded of the criteria that are in your consent decree, and actually are very, very similar to this. So ranked in order of importance, these following criteria must be followed. To the extent practicable, council districts shall be geographically contiguous. They shall respect the geographic integrity of any local neighborhood or local community of interest. They should be easily identifiable and understandable by residents, and bounded by natural and artificial barriers, streets, or city boundaries. And they should be drawn to encourage geographical compactness, which means that nearby areas of population are not bypassed in favor of more distant populations. So there's a little note in here, and we'll go through all of these in more detail. So this is just your summary. This criterion, this is the geographical compactness criterion, must not conflict with the preceding criteria in this subdivision. So essentially, one has to kind of weigh these criteria against each other and make sure that they can all be implemented properly, but this particular one can just not conflict with the preceding criteria. Also, the council shall not adopt council district boundaries for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against a political party. The Escondido consent decree is also, and let me just try to get this blurb here out of the way. I'm very sorry. The Escondido consent decree was filed, of course, oh gosh, where am I? I'm having a very fidgety computer tonight. I apologize. The Escondido consent decree again was, of course, filed in the San Diego, well, the case was filed in San Diego Superior Court in 2011, and the consent decree came about in April of 2013. Plaintiffs claimed in the consent decree, just to remind you, that racially polarized voting in at-large city council elections diluted the voting strength of Escondido's Latino voters and impaired their ability to elect candidates of their choice. These are all terms, the highlighted terms there are all terms that you will find in the Federal Voting Rights Act. So racially polarized voting, dilution, and electing candidates of their choice. These are all terms that are found in the Federal Voting Rights Act. There was a consent decree reached in April of 2013, and then that switched, of course, Escondido from at-large elections to 4 single-member council districts. The decree outlines that there shall be a selection panel, there shall be a redistricting commission, and then, of course, it is very, very detailed on the criteria for districts. It says, the commission shall conduct an open and transparent process that ensures full and meaningful public consideration of and comment on the drawing of district lines. It also talks about translations of all materials and in-person events, and it provides for advance notice of meetings held in geographically diverse areas. I'm going to just ask Zach really quickly if you can hear me. I want to make sure that you are able to see that there's people in the waiting room, Zach. I'm not sure if I should be admitting people or if you're going to take care of that.
You know what? I think I might have accidentally made you the host during this time to allow you to do the sharing screen. So I'm so sorry. If you could admit, that would be great. Or if you want to kick the hosting privileges back to myself, I think that might be what is going on.
Okay, so I'm not sure where they went. They just kind of went away. But the next person that comes in, I will admit. Okay, is that okay?
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. So back to this. So this was our overview of the consent decree. And then let's go to the criteria in the consent decree. And you will be reminded of something that we just went over with the Fair Maps Act. And, you know, since this consent decree came first and the Fair Maps Act came second, I have a feeling that some people may have looked at your consent decree because there's definitely some similarities here. So again, you have the compliance with the US Constitution as your first criterion. Then you have complying with the Federal Voting Rights Act. As your third criterion, your district shall be contiguous and drawn to encourage compactness. District shall respect the geographic integrity of neighborhoods and communities of interest. And district shall not be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party, incumbent, or candidate. So you see that your consent decree is actually, it casts a wider net, especially on this 5th criterion, which is like the non-criterion basically, which is where you're being told what not to do. The Fair Maps Act only talks about political party. And for Escondido, we are also talking about incumbents or candidates. And a little note here, again, the criteria are ranked, so they are ranked in order. So what's most important is that you comply with the US Constitution, including reasonably equal population. And then your second criterion, second most important criterion is compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And then you go through in order of importance. So contiguity, compactness, the geographic integrity of neighborhoods and communities of interest, and then finally the non-criterion, which is basically what not to do. And that is to not draw political districts, don't discriminate, don't favor against a political party, an incumbent, or a candidate. So let's go through these criteria, since we've heard about them so much, in a little bit more detail. The US Constitution and equal population, really, these criteria come from the 14th Amendment. This is the Equal Protection Amendment. It is roughly interpreted to require reasonably equal district populations. In other words, one person, one vote. You hear this a lot when you're talking about redistricting. People talk about one person, one vote, and what they usually are talking about is that the district should be equal in population. What the 14th Amendment also does is it prohibits intentional discrimination, because that is a violation of equal protection. So, and then we have the 15th Amendment, which also relates to redistricting, because it bans racial discrimination in voting. Let's talk about equal population a little bit. And at this point, we can only talk about it so much because we don't have the census data yet. Again, as I mentioned earlier, while Census Day was on April 1 in 2020, usually we have our census data by the end of March in the year ending with 0. So that would have been this last March. But because of COVID and because so many of the counting procedures and just everything basically ground to a halt, the census asked for more time and received it. And they're not going to give us census data, the decennial census data, until August 16. By August 16, they will be releasing some data for us. Of course, you know that we have already received the reapportionment data. The reapportionment data come from the same data set. That's also data collected by the decennial census. But as you also know, they did not have to process them on what we call a small unit of analysis. And I'll show you what that means a little bit later in a little map. But they only had to process and figure out how many people are in each state. And that, of course, is a much lower burden than to have to figure out how many people are in every city, in every county, and in every little census block in the United States. So they were able to do that much earlier. And there's always a delay between the reapportionment data and the reapportionment counts being released and the release of the census data for redistricting purposes. And again, we will have our 2020 census results by August 16 or maybe sooner. We're keeping our fingers crossed. I'll probably know a little bit more by next week, because I am embarking onto some meetings with the census people later this week, but that's where we're at. So just to illustrate what the ideal population is and what equal population actually means in redistricting, we put this little slide together that just looks at the Escondido 2010 census population, which was 143,911. So these were people that were counted on Census Day, April 1, 2010, the year ending with 0, and then those data were released a year later. You will also have heard, I am sure, or if you're Googling how many people are in Escondido, I'm sure you are finding some estimates. So these are not numbers that come from the decennial census. The American Community Survey is a longitudinal survey. So it's something that's administered on a regular basis over time. The American Community Survey also estimates how many people live in cities and counties and so forth, and they put those data out every year. But again, those are estimates, and what we need to use for redistricting is an actual count of the population, and that is what the courts have told us and actually what California has told us. So we do not get to use these estimates to figure out how many people should be in each district. We added these two numbers, the 2015 and the 2019 ACS American Community Survey estimates, just to show you something that you probably know since you live in Escondido, and that is that the population has been going up significantly since 2010. And that also means that your districts are going to change. So because they're currently perfectly populated, or they were perfectly populated, as long as one was looking at the 2010 census data. But Clearly, that is not the case anymore. So what is the ideal population for the Escondido City Council districts? Well, you take the you take the total population. So again, this is what the census will be telling us on August 16 or maybe sooner. And then you divide it by the 4 districts or by 4, and then you get the ideal population for each district. So for 2010, that meant we took the 143,911 and we divided it by 4, and that got us to 35,977 roughly people per district. And here's a little reminder that sometimes people think that it's not people, it's not the total population that you're using for redistricting. Sometimes people think it's about voters and how many voters are in each district, or how many citizens are in each district, or how many people that are 18 and over are in each district. And redistricting is actually done by total population. So everybody who gets counted by the census in the decennial census is part of this equation. And that's how the districts are being drawn. So moving on to this next criteria, this next slide, how equal is equal? What does that mean to have equally populated districts? And there's actually different standards for different jurisdictions, or really for different plans or maps. For example, congressional districts are held to strict scrutiny. They have to be extremely equal. So you don't get to deviate a whole lot there. But lower level districts, such as legislative districts like assembly districts or senate districts, or board of supervisors districts, or city council districts, they have a little bit more flexibility. Generally, the law says districts must be reasonably equal. So that means, be reasonable about it. Look at it in context of the other criteria. You have some leeway there, you have a little bit of flexibility, and generally some deviation above or below the ideal population is allowed and acceptable. For Voting Rights Act compliance, generally the Department of Justice has used a plus minus 5% deviation. And if you look at case law, it's generally been okay to use plus minus 5% deviation. So that means you deviate from the ideal population up to plus minus 5%. So basically one district is maybe over a little bit, some district is maybe under a little bit. And generally you do that to be able to meet the other criteria. Like for example, if you have a neighborhood that you want to keep together, but that neighborhood kind of goes, that if you keep it together, it just kind of pushes you over your ideal population a little bit in that district. So meaning that that one district would grow a little bit, and then consequently, of course, the other district would shrink a little bit, then that is generally okay if you don't go, overboard, basically. If you can stick within plus minus 5% and you have good reasons for it, you should be okay. So let's talk about the Federal Voting Rights Act of 65 just a tiny little bit, because that is our second criterion, and it's really the second criterion in all redistrictings. And sometimes you see redistricting laws that don't really specifically mention it. They just start with other criteria. It's kind of implied that you have to equalize populations because that's really why you do redistricting. And also, you have to comply with federal law, of course. Just a little recap, Federal Voting Rights Act was passed in response to the civil rights movement and widespread disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South, most likely, most prominently. It was the strongest, but not first federal law that dealt with voting rights. It was amended a few times. It was amended in 1970, 75, 82, and 2006. And the major expansions in 75 and 92 were really about language minorities and access. So access to the polls and so forth, and language access. And that was really prompted by a changing overall population. We weren't so much looking at the South anymore. We were looking more comprehensively at the entire US. and there were populations that just were not able to participate. And so that necessitated some of these major expansions and new laws. Then in 2013, the Voting Rights Act was gutted in Shelby versus Holder. And basically what it did, it did away, it said the coverage formula. So essentially what booted some of these areas into pre-clearance. So these were areas that had to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice because they had a history of violations or discrimination. The coverage formula that had been used, the court said was unconstitutional, and that then basically meant that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was no longer with us. In California, we had at the time 4 counties that were covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And this is the first redistricting for the state where these areas are not covered anymore. So this is going to be a very interesting process because they did receive some special consideration previously, and that is just no longer there. But what is still there is the Federal Voting Rights Act. I'm gonna admit some people in the waiting room, I think. Just one moment, please. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Waiting room, admit. Okay, just one second. I think I have just admitted some people into the waiting room. Yeah, okay. Great, I'm pretty proud of myself. I managed to admit some people into the meeting. Welcome, everybody. And I'm sorry if I accidentally kicked you out earlier. I didn't know how to do that. So back to this presentation. Criterion 2 is, of course, Federal Voting Rights Act. And this is Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is still with us. It's alive and well, and it factors into redistricting in various ways. What it does is it prohibits the denial or abridgment of voting rights on the basis of race or language minority status. And the Voting Rights Act, and that's the Federal Voting Rights Act, defines language minority as Asian, Native American, Alaskan, or Spanish heritage. And that does not apply to other language groups. So for example, if you're a Swedish speaker or you're Finnish or something like that, you are not protected by the Federal Voting Rights Act because you may be a language minority in the state of California as a Swedish speaker, but you are not covered by the Federal Voting Rights Act. What the Federal Voting Rights Act Section 2 does is it prohibits practices that have the purpose or effect of discriminating on the basis of race or language minority status. I'm not going to go too much into this. Again, I am not an attorney, but I know we have an attorney on this commission. So I'm sure we'll be talking about this sometime in the future. It applies nationwide to all jurisdictions that conduct elections. Sometimes when I give a presentation about redistricting and redistricting law, depending on where I am, people start to take it very personally. They say, like, why would this apply to us? We didn't do anything wrong. And basically, rest assured, everybody, this applies to everybody. Nobody's picking on anybody. It applies nationwide to all jurisdictions that conduct elections. There we go. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is generally implemented by looking at the Jingles test. So this is a case, it's called Jingles, Thornburg versus Jingles. And it established some criteria by which we assess whether we have what some people call a Section 2 district or a majority minority district. So essentially, we would be looking at Escondido, and we would look at whether there is a minority group that is large enough to constitute a majority in the district. So that means in California, you have to look at 50% or more citizen voting age population. Citizen voting age population is generally abbreviated as CVAP, and you'll hear us talk about CVAP quite a bit in this process going forward. So please note that we're now talking about citizens when before we were talking about everybody. So when you're talking about the ideal population of your district, you're looking at everybody. everybody who is enumerated or counted by the census in the decennial. When we're looking at the voting rights, compliance, we're switching over and we're actually looking at citizen voting age population. However, having said that, I should also say that we still need to know what the ideal population for each district is, because that's how we know whether we will have a minority group that is large enough to constitute a majority in the district. Oops. Sorry. The minority group must be geographically compact. We'll talk about what compactness is in a little bit. So essentially, just to give you the nutshell explanation, it means that the minority group can't be just distributed all over the city of Escondido. It needs to be in one area. The minority group must vote cohesively. That means that basically the minority group votes for the same candidate, just to simplify it, in elections where they're trying to, vote and elect the same candidate. And then there must be evidence of polarized voting against the minority group. And that basically just is the flip side of that coin. The minority group votes for one candidate and the majority votes for somebody else. And because of that, the minority group can just never elect somebody in the district. So that is essentially, in a nutshell, the Jingles test. And we will be going through some preliminary assessments of the Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act in this process. So you'll hear more about this. The Federal Voting Rights Act on vote dilution. And vote dilution. Electoral systems can limit the ability to elect a candidate of choice. Do you remember I highlighted those words earlier? So candidate of choice is something that you hear a lot with the Federal Voting Rights Act, by a protected class of voters. Remember, protected class are our protected language minority groups and then also racial minority groups in various ways. For example, an at-large election system can make it impossible for even a large minority group to elect a candidate of choice when the majority votes against them. And of course, the 2013 consent decree in Escondido, if you take a look at it, you will see some of that language in the consent decree. Single member districts, so this is where we are at right now. Single member districts can be drawn in ways that minimize voters' ability to elect a candidate of choice also. And there's various ways to do that. I will show you some of them in a second, but in just overall, to get our terminology together, so we're all talking about the same thing, systems that limit the ability to elect in this way are said to dilute minority voting strength. So if we are a Federal Voting Rights Act and vote dilution, a redistricting plan, so again, now we're in redistricting, we're not in at large, we are in districts. So we're drawing districts, and what can you do wrong under the Federal Voting Rights Act, under Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act? Well, a redistricting plan can dilute minority voting strength in two main ways. There is cracking and there is packing, and I bet you have heard those terms before. So cracking is dividing up a politically viable population concentration so it doesn't constitute a majority in any district. And that is quite a mouthful, I understand. So I have some illustrations of this in one of the next slides. And when we say a politically viable population, it basically means this is your protected minority group. It means that you're cracking the protected minority group that could be a majority in the district, and you basically just divide it in a way that it can't be a majority in the district. So essentially they still can't elect anybody, even though there is a district-based election system. Packing means it's the opposite. Let's just say you have, let me just read it first, drawing high proportion minority populations into one district when it could be politically viable in more than one district. So let's say you have your minority population and you're looking at it and everybody is geographically compact and so forth. And all the other criteria are met from the Jingles case. And you look at it and you're like, well, I could really draw these districts so that the minority group could be a majority in two of the districts, but you decide, nah, you're not going to do that. and you're just going to divide that minority group up so that they cannot be a majority in at least one of the districts. So this is an example, and I would like to thank my colleague Justin Levitt from Loyola Law School for this. Justin is currently not teaching election law anymore. He was tapped by the Biden administration to work there as a, I think he's a special, he is definitely a very special attorney. He knows a lot about voting rights. He's special advisor, I think, for voting rights and elections. It's something like that. I'm sure I'm butchering it, and in a future meeting, I will clarify what his title is. But before he was tapped as a special advisor, he was, he's one of the most sought after experts on redistricting and voting rights in the country. And he put this slide together, and I just want to thank him for letting me use it. So this is an illustration of cracking and packing. If you're looking at those colored little circles there, you'll see that you have, so let's just say the colored circles are your minority population, and the white circles are your majority population. And you see that if you count the colored circles, like in the leftmost district, you see that you have 4 of the colored circles, 2, 4, 5 of the white circles. So the colored circles are not a majority in the district. You have the same thing in the upper district. You have 4 to 5 again. And you have that basically in all of the districts. You have just 4 of the colored circles, but more of the white circles. So your minority population is going to be outnumbered, and that is called cracking. But you could also then use packing, and you could put too many people into a district. So for example, on the right side, you see that pretty much my entire minority population was packed into one district. So they can elect some people, or potentially can elect somebody of their choice in that one district, but not in the other ones. And that is also not permitted. Here's a minority vote dilution example that I am now giving credit to another colleague of mine for, and this was created by Stephen Ochoa from MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He, a few years ago, gave me permission to use this particular slide. So this is kind of what people call a heat map. And where you see like the most intense red, you see the most concentrated population of citizen voting age population for Latinos. And here's a minority vote dilution example. If you draw a district around it on the left, you see that that particular district shape only has 38% Latino citizen voting age population. So it doesn't go over 50%. But on the right, this is the same area, and you just drew it a little differently, and all of a sudden you have 51% Latino citizen voting age population. So such is the power of drawing districts where you can either meet or not meet the requirements of the Federal Voting Rights Act. So back to away from the maps here right now for a second. There are 2 parts really to complying with the Voting Rights Act. So there's measuring and analyzing on one side, and then there's drawing the district on the other side. So, to meet the Jingles criteria, if you have, and this is something that we will do, we will take a look as soon as we get the census data to see if there is potentially an area that could constitute, where we have a minority group that could constitute a majority in a district. And if that is the case, then an expert would conduct a racially polarized voting analysis. And then you would work with the expert and council to make decisions about whether or not a majority minority district should be drawn. That's on one side. And then on the other side is you then actually draw a district. So you work with your redistricting consultant to construct districts that comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. The way to do what's called a a racially polarized voting analysis, or to actually implement all of this, is you first calculate your minority proportion of citizen voting age population in a region. Then you determine the voting patterns by race and ethnicity in that region. And we're now, of course, talking about the region or the area rather in the city of Escondido. And then you would assess the practical opportunity to elect candidates of choice in that region or area. And then you would also consider qualitative and historical contextual circumstances. And that is generally known as the totality of the circumstances. So this is where, you have some qualitative and historical information that comes in. So you look at a history of voting related discrimination. You look at the extent of racially polarized voting, the extent of discriminatory voting practices or procedures, the extent to which the minority group members bear the effects of past discrimination. Like, for example, you can look at education, employment, and health, which may hinder their ability to participate effectively in the political process. And then the extent to which minority members have been elected. And of course, again, this is all pretty dense, and we don't want to go into any more detail today. We can talk about this in future meetings if you're interested. You don't have to memorize any of this. These slides are available to you. We're all available to you. We have not yet started to do any analysis. We don't know that we'll have to do this analysis. So at this point, we just want to park this conversation and then talk about it once we know more, once the census data are released and we actually know what the ideal population of our districts is. So here one more time, very quickly, to summarize, for the Federal Voting Rights Act and compliance and vote dilution, you would basically look at whether minorities represent most of the voters in a concentrated area, citizen voting age population. So essentially voters is kind of short for eligible voters. And then do white people, it's usually white people, it's usually the majority. It could also be, another group, but generally it's the majority. Do they tend to vote for different candidates than minorities? And then is the minority population otherwise protected given the totality of the circumstances? And if you have 3 yeses on that, then basically it says do not dilute, and then you will have to look at drawing a Section 2 district under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And if you look at my little bubbles here on the right, you see how a majority minority district can actually be drawn, where you can get 5 of our friends into one district, our colored circle friends into a district. And again, that is the power of good line drawing, is to meet all the criteria and do a good job. Let's go to contiguity. So I just want to make sure, in case your head is spinning right now, it's getting a little bit easier. The most complex piece of a redistricting and the redistricting criteria is always the Federal Voting Rights Act. And I just want to make sure that you feel like you're in good hands. We will be helping you with all of this. You don't have to do it by yourself. You have a really great team. You have counsel, you have redistricting consultants, and we have experts on our team that will help you through this, and we will do a good job. So the third criterion is contiguity. Contiguity is essentially just as a geography in which all parts are connected to each other. In other words, it's a district in which one may travel from any location to any other location without crossing the district boundary. And it doesn't say anywhere that you have to be able to travel with your car or with your skateboard or whatever. So the mode of travel here is really not addressed. You just basically have to get from A to B without leaving the district somehow. The Fair Maps Act gave us some more clarity about contiguity. And essentially what they said is that areas that meet only at the points of adjoining corners of the districts are not contiguous. Areas that are separated by water and not connected by a bridge, a tunnel, or regular ferry service are not contiguous. So These things at this point, I don't think they will apply here in Escondido to our redistricting, but I will show you a couple of maps anyway, just to wrap your head around this, because it does apply in some other areas. This is a congressional district from a long time ago. So the brown area is the congressional district, and everything around it is actually water. It's contiguous by land, even though it looks pretty funny. And this is not okay in California. So this is a district that is only connected by this tiny little dot there. And that would not fly in California anymore under the Fair Maps Act. But you have 4 districts in Escondido, and I just don't see a situation where this would happen, where we would even be talking about this. This is contiguity cross bridges. So those of you who have been up north, this is the Bay Area, and your little connection here. This is a district that the people in Marin really did not like because it connected them. This is a really old district. I think it's 30 years old. It connected them, or at least 20. It connected them with the city and county of San Francisco across the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is basically bridge contiguity, and under California law, that will be okay. And this one here is water contiguity. So this is islands. This would actually still be okay, even though there's no bridge. There is ferry service, and if there's regular ferry service, then you'd be okay. So again, these are really old districts, and they're not in effect anymore. So let's move on to criterion 4. And that is compactness. So the California Fair Maps Act also has something to say about geographical compactness. So it says districts shall be drawn to encourage geographical compactness. And then it clarifies that nearby areas of population are not bypassed in favor of more distant populations. So essentially, don't reach out and grab people when you have people that are close by that you can put into your district. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different redistricting tools out there, and most of them have compactness measures as part of their redistricting tools. So that means that if you're playing with the software and you're creating a district and you want to measure your compactness, there is a whole bunch of different measures that you can pull down in your district tools or in your redistricting tools section, and it will give you a measure about what your compactness score is. There is no compactness score in any of those that I have seen that would measure this particular requirement. So nearby areas of population are not bypassed in favor of more distant populations is not part of the compactness measures that are generally available. So, moving forward, when people come in and they say, hey, your district is not compact, we may have to explain or we may have to engage in a conversation about why they think a district is not compact, and then just, ask them to and explain to them that probably if they did use these measures, then they are looking at a measure that's just not used in California for local redistricting. The other thing is that people think of compactness in terms of if it's a square, it's compact, or if it's a rectangle. Clean lines are basically compact district, and it's not necessarily so. Is interesting because it really, for us, again, it depends on where our populations are living. So aside from the fact that this is a criterion that's pretty far down on our list, this is, and we need to meet all the other criteria first. It's just basically it's basically one of those things where you really have to look at it in action and then figure out, is this compact? Do we need to draw this compact district? And what does it do to our other criteria? So let's look at some maps here in a second. So compactness, just in general, it's a geographic criterion, right? That references shape in relation to population. And again, as I said, there are many different ways to measure compactness, but most common complaints really come from appearances. So again, this is where people come in and they say, just draw squares. It's really easy, just give it to a computer and draw a square. I mean, it might sound easy, but it also, and it may be easy in fact, but it's probably also going to violate all your other criteria. The, you know, few previous Supreme Courts ago, there was one of the judges who essentially kind of talked about the appearance of the district, and that they would know whether something was amiss when a district kind of looked funny or it looked strange. So does a district look funny? Well, look at this. Does this look funny to you? What is this? This is actually a city boundary, and this is the city boundary for Bakersfield. And I'm sure some of you have seen this map, and it's one of my favorites because for the state commission, for example, they have to keep cities and counties together as much as possible. So just imagine if Bakersfield had the perfect population and would meet all the other criteria to just be a district, its own district. This is what the district boundary would look like, because this is the district boundary. This is the city boundary for for Bakersfield, I'm sorry. And if you have to keep it together, then you're basically following all those little, rectangles and squares that are on this tail, and the tail's on the left, and so forth. So you don't necessarily know if something is compact just by looking at it. I have another one for you, and I bet some of you or all of you maybe know what this is. This is your own city boundary. So here we have Escondido, and it's not necessarily compact. There are some compact areas, but your district boundaries will always reflect the geography that you're working with. So that's basically the message here. This is another one. This is these are two jurisdictions in Tulare County, and this is Porterville and East Porterville. And not only are these not compact, they're also weaving into each other. So personally, I could look at compactness maps or supposed compactness maps and city boundaries all day. This is, if you're looking at the lower piece here of Porterville, you see that this may not even be a contiguous district, because this little chunk and this little chunk is actually cut off. So if you were to put this into the same district, you would have to really be careful with respect to drawing contiguous boundaries. So this is an interesting one. So now we go to our criterion 5. And maybe some of you have heard me say this. This is my favorite criterion ever. And this is something that I've spent most of my career working on. It's communities of interest. So neighborhoods and communities of interest. So what are these communities of interest? So communities of interest are really defined by those that are familiar with the community. There's not many really limitations of what a community of interest is, or what binds a community of interest. The consent decree gives us some detail. It says that communities of interest may include communities of racial, ethnic, and language minorities. And it's great to have that detail in there because we know what we can look for. It's also generally, as I said before, it's up to those who live in or work with communities to identify and establish the interests that unite it. So basically it's defined by those familiar with the community. So either you live there, or maybe you work for an advocacy group, maybe you're a business owner, and you know something about the community, so you can establish a community of interest by just telling you all about it. This is the community, these are the interests. The interests they need not be limited to the current situation, so what's going on the ground right now, but they can also include common goals. So for example, economic interests or social interests. So the economic interests for current situations could be there's common employment or economic opportunities, or maybe lack of economic opportunities in a particular area of Escondido. Goals could be expanding opportunities. So a community is working on maybe bringing in some development, bringing in some business, bringing in some jobs, and so forth. Social interests are very wide ranging. So current ones could be, schools, you're working on your schools. It could be cultural ties that bind a community. Let's just say there's some cultural, some cultural centers where people get together that have a shared history. It could be transportation or even parks. Parks are pretty popular for social interests when people talk about their communities, because it seems like in almost every jurisdiction there is a community that organizes around parks. If it's a cleanup or maybe getting some more funding into the park and so forth, or just general recreational opportunities. Again, if you're working on recreational opportunities, that could be a goal, and that is a community of interest, or could be a community of interest also. So there's not a lot of limits there. However, there is one big limitation in the Fair Maps Act, and I mentioned this earlier very briefly. It says the council shall not adopt council district boundaries for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against a political party. And as I mentioned, Escondido is more specific and more broad, and it basically says incumbents or candidates' place of residence shall not be taken into account, and districts shall not be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party, incumbent, or candidate. And that kind of factors into your communities of interest. It factors into your district building. It factors into pretty much your entire process. So let's talk about data and these criteria really quickly. This part's going to go pretty quick. I am absolutely sure that we're going to be talking about data as we move forward. Again, once we actually have some data. The data that we use, that we get from the decennial census, is referred to as the PL 94-171. This will become second nature to you to talk about the PL or the PL 94 or the PL 94-171, or just the redistricting data set from the census. And it's just redistricting lingo. So that's what we use for, assessing equal population. For Voting Rights Act compliance, you use the PL, you use statement of registration, statement of vote, citizen voting age population from the American Community Survey. Then for contiguity and compactness, we're also relying on the census. So you see that the census is all over this, basically. It's census geography that we use to measure both of these. And then for criterion 5, we are in a different ballpark. We are in public testimony, data and geography submitted by the public, and so forth, because there is really no data set out there that will give us all of the communities of interest for Escondido, for San Diego County, for the state of California, or the neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are very specific to jurisdictions. There are some jurisdictions that have very well-defined neighborhoods that people are actually agreeing to. People that live in those neighborhoods, they're like, yes, this is my neighborhood. I agree that this is my neighborhood boundary. And then there's other areas where people are like, the city doesn't know where the neighborhoods are. We define our own neighborhoods. So this is really something that is very specific to the jurisdiction. And then finally, of course, for criterion 6, which is, ignore politics, you don't need data for that. You just have to ignore things. So that's a pretty easy one. Geographies really quickly, we're building districts, so we're going to be talking about geography. So the data sets that are discussed in these slides are all released on different geographies. This is something you can just kind of glance over. I'm happy to, again, explain this in more detail once we actually have data from the census. Census data are released on census blocks. So that's the smallest, what's called unit of analysis, on which data are reported. And that's your building block for your districts. We'll show you a slide in a little while with a census block on it. And then the American Community Survey data are released on census block groups. So that is the smallest unit of analysis for American Community Survey data. Census blocks make up census block groups. So census block groups, it's a group of census blocks, essentially. And then there's a statement of vote and election results. They are released on election precincts, and those have nothing to do with census geography. So it gets really interesting there really quickly because you're dealing with these different data sets and you're also dealing with different geographies. Census geography is maintained by the Census Bureau. Again, they change that every 10 years. They change the census geography, basically in advance of the new census being released, but that also means on the flip side that it stays constant for 10 years. It stays constant between censuses. So once you get the new census, you get your new census blocks. You know for each census block in California, how many people live there, what's the voting age population, so basically how many people are 18 and over, and also what's the race and ethnicity of everybody who lives in that census block. And you will get that again in August. And that is a data set that we will use to build our districts. On the other hand, precinct geography is maintained by the registrars of voters of the counties. We have 58 counties in California, and every registrar has their own precincts, and they're basically just organizing units for them to find polling places, to design ballots, to make sure that ballot groups that everybody's getting the right ballot, that every ballot group has the right elections and contests on them, and so forth. So this really has nothing to do with the census. It has everything to do with election officials running elections and doing a good job at it. But they change frequently because as soon as there is a need to change these organizing units, the registrars will do that. And so they do not stay constant. So essentially, when you're looking at databases and redistricting databases, you're kind of running into this kind of apples and oranges situation where you have to figure out how to actually compare all these different things. And so I'm going to go back to the data for our criterion 1 now, which we all know is from the census, released on the census block, and will be released by August 16th. So again, Census 2020 redistricting data called Public Law 94-171, PL 94, PL 94-171, contains the count of the US population. It's a census block level data set. And you've heard me say this now a few times, and I'm doing this on purpose, by the way, because this stuff is so abstract when you're new to redistricting, or even if you've done it like 10 years ago. It's helpful to hear this a few times because it helps you just kind of to remember that it was there. And again, I know this is a very dense presentation. This is a training. This is a first of many. We will be talking about this again in smaller chunks. You can go back to this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. Nobody's going to get quizzed on this. This is hard stuff to remember. It's an overview, so please don't feel bad if you're not remembering everything, or if some things are just seem overwhelming right now. So this, again, equal population, it's a census block level data set. It includes data on people's race and ethnicity for total population and voting age population. Voting age population, 18 and over. It's based on responses to the Census 2020. Remember, Census Day last year, April 1, kind of went down the tubes for us because of COVID, but we're getting our census data anyway, even though they're going to be late. And there are 5 detailed tables that will be released on August 16th by the census, and 1 additional table this time. So this is the new additional table. The additional table will be released for the first time in 2021, and it's group quarters, and we can talk about that later or at a different presentation in more detail. But basically, this is what it looks like. You have your table 1, which has race and total population. Table 2 has Hispanic, Latino, or not Hispanic, Latino by race. Then we have table 3, which is race of the population 18 and over. And then table 4, which is Latino, non-Latino for the population 18 and over. And then we have housing units, occupancy status. And again, there's 1 additional table that just shows us how many people live in group quarters. And group quarters are, for example, college dorms, long-term care facilities and prisons and other correctional institutions. Criterion 2, so what data do we need to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act? We are going to need this decennial census data, American Community Survey data, voter registration data, statement of vote data, and just a little note to self here, just because we actually may be looking at political data, i.e. voter registration and statement of vote, doesn't mean that you're violating any criteria that say that you're not supposed to draw districts with political data or so. It does not mean that they should or will be used for political purposes. You have to use these data to make sure that you're complying with the Federal Voting Rights Act, because you're not going to know whether people vote cohesively or whether the majority group votes against the minority group if you're not looking at election data and voter registration data. So that's essentially why these data sets are here. And then you're also looking at geography. The American Community Survey is where we get citizen voting age population. The American Community Survey, for those of you who are, maybe as old as I am, or even a little bit younger, you will remember this, that there used to be a long form that people would get if they were lucky. I was once one of those lucky people. 1 out of 6 households used to get a long form from the census, and it had a whole bunch of questions on there. And in 2005, the Census Bureau basically said, our costs are out of control. We need to figure out what to do. And they did away with the long form. And they essentially just collected all of this information through the American Community Survey. So in 2010, for the first time, we only had the short form. So what we all responded to in 2020 on April 1 or in 2010 on April 1 is basically what used to be known as the short form, because there was also a long form which had a whole bunch of questions on it. The ACS is now conducted monthly. They are surveying the entire United States. They survey every month around 300,000 households and ask a whole bunch of questions. And because of that, because it's an ongoing survey, there is more recent data estimates available to everybody because it's ongoing, because the decennial census only gets collected every 10 years. Well, the deal is basically that because it's a survey and it has a relatively small sample, what they're providing us with is estimates. So we don't get to use estimates to draw our districts. We only get to use total population to equalize our districts. However, for voting rights compliance, we need one variable from these guys, and that is citizen voting age population. And that is collected by the American Community Survey. I think probably some of you are sitting there right now and going, I remember something about citizenship, and wasn't that supposed to be part of the decennial census questionnaire? And if you remember that, you are correct. There was a whole hullabaloo going on where the last administration wanted to put a citizenship question onto the short form, onto the decennial census questionnaire, but that was done away with. Everybody knew that this would depress the participation in the census, and people would just not fill it out. And so there was a court that agreed, and it never made it onto the questionnaire. So again, we are relying on the American Community Survey to give us that one variable, which is citizen voting age population. And we need that to figure out whether we have a district that has 50% or more of a protected citizen voting age population. Okay. Voter registration is also necessary for compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. Again, this is political data. As I explained, that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. On the statement of registration, or SOR, you will find total registration, party ID, so basically how are people registered, age, cycles registered, and then race and ethnicity. And you get race and ethnicity on voter registration from surname matching. And that is something we could have an 8-hour conversation about, whether, how accurate that is, but it has actually been accepted by the courts, so it's very frequently used. The statement of vote, similarly, it contains the results of an election. The results are reported by election precinct. So, you see all these different geographies that I talked about earlier. And the statement of vote includes the following variables. It's total vote, votes for candidates, votes for measures, and then votes for propositions. Here's that slide that I promised you earlier. If you look at the little dotted red lines, that is actually a census block boundary for an unnamed jurisdiction somewhere in California. I don't know where that one was. But basically, when you're looking at this, you should look at the fact that these are not little squares, these census block boundaries, even though there are some in there that kind of look a little bit more square, like this little fella here, for example. But some of them are just much bigger. If you look at this, this guy here is much bigger, and probably means that there's not too many people living in it, because remember that the vote is reported by now I'm talking about precincts. So there's probably not that many people in it, because the census blocks, just like precincts, are designed to some extent to preserve privacy. So for precincts are never super small, or in a perfect world, they're not super small and don't have very few people in it, because you don't want to re-identify from the total vote, how many people have voted, how people have voted basically in that precinct. For the census, it's basically the same thing. They don't want to make the census blocks too small to avoid some sort of violation of people's privacy and confidentiality. So sometimes you get census blocks that are a lot larger, and that is usually true in rural areas, for example, where you don't have a lot of dense populations. And you see the same with precincts. But over here, what you have is, this is a precinct boundary, and this is really illustrating that precincts and census geography don't have a whole lot to do with each other. And so for our data nerds that are listening here, the solution to the problem of changing precincts is the building of a longitudinal redistricting database that allows you to look at all of these data sets on just one geography. And that is usually the census block. And you don't have to do this. We don't have to do this for you. Zach doesn't have to do it for us. We already have a database that does this for the state of California, and that is called the statewide database. It's a redistricting database for the state of California. The state pays for it, so it's publicly available, and that is what we're going to be using for redistricting, and that is what all of the local jurisdictions are by law required to use for redistricting. And the reason for that is right here. It is that the decennial census data that are released by August 16 will be adjusted by the statewide database to reallocate people that are enumerated in facilities that are under the control of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So basically it's not the county jails, but it's the state facilities, correctional facilities. Everybody who was counted in those facilities will be reallocated from where they were counted to their last known address. And that's what the statewide database is going to do. So that's basically a slight census adjustment. So some of the data that we see in Escondido will probably go up because there is no correctional facility in Escondido, as far as I know. So nobody will be taken out, but there are, I'm pretty sure, some people that are incarcerated in facilities under the control of the CDCR, and they will be reallocated into Escondido as well as throughout the state of California. The statewide database also makes census, voter registration, statement of vote, and citizen voting age population data available free of charge via its website. And these data are available on the census block level. Census blocks are our building blocks for redistricting. And so basically, we're in pretty good shape. Let's talk about contiguity and compactness really quickly one more time. So they address the geography of the district. We saw some maps earlier. Census geography is used to draw districts and meet these criteria. And again, we talked about census blocks already. And just remember that California defines what does not qualify as a contiguous district. And California also has its own definition for compactness. Neighborhoods and communities of interest, very quickly, I mentioned this earlier. For neighborhoods, definitions and boundaries are not generally readily available. Sometimes they are. We will no doubt have a conversation together about this. And what basically needs to be collected if there are no neighborhoods available, or maybe just spotty neighborhoods available, so maybe just some of them, maybe larger neighborhoods, but not sub-neighborhoods, is public testimony. So we will be engaging with the public, and that's where your meaningful conversation with the public comes in, as the consent decree asks you to do. You know, you want to really engage in some conversations with everybody. You want to collect some public testimony about this and get some feedback from the public about where neighborhoods are and what should stay together. And then communities of interest, it becomes even more interesting there. They are definitely not readily available, and you will have to collect those. And that's, again, public testimony, data and geography submitted by the public. And sometimes they can be supplemented with other data. So how do you collect information about communities of interest? Jane is going to show you a little demo in just a few slides from here. But I'll just walk you through some of the basic key points here. You just request for people to tell you about it. And some people say, oh yeah, those are just stories. Well, those are qualitative data, basically. And just because just one person tells you about their community of interest doesn't mean that it's worth any less than, 10 people, 20 people coming in. Communities of interest can be defined by various people, and then you will weigh whether that community of interest should stay together. And that is part of your job as the Independent Redistricting Commission of Escondido. And I'm sure you will hear a lot about your beautiful city in the next few months. You want to ask the public just generally to answer the following questions, like what bonds your community, where's your community located? And sometimes people come in and say, well, I have some data here, and that basically just says, that proves that we are really a community of interest. Like people say, we're all, we have like a lower income group here and so forth. And, people want to bring that in, that's fine. They don't have to bring it in. You don't have to, provide data that support your community of interest. You can just explain what your community of interest is and what makes your community of interest. If you have some data also, that's great. But we don't want to raise the burden of establishing a community of interest artificially. Generally speaking, what do you need to know? You need to know where it is, right? So the location, where is it in your city? You want to get some boundaries, like, is there a river or a street? Is it the city limit? Is it a shopping center? Is it a park? It's always helpful to have a map. There's free mapping software available, such as Google Maps. There's drawmycacommunity.org, which is the state's community of interest input tool. And Jane is going to demo that in a second. There's QGIS, which is a free free mapping software that is available. And then there's fee-based mapping software that's also available. And, however people come in, they can talk about it. They can give you a hard copy. They can hand you a map. They can mail us a map. They can draw a map on a napkin. That's all fine. And we will digitize these maps, and they will also become building blocks in your redistricting data set. This is an example of how a community of interest map might look if you get it from Google Maps. Somebody may just put something together and then send it over. This is, of course, not for Escondido. This is for the Central Valley, and it's a made-up community. And with that, I am actually going to let Jane take over and show us a live demonstration, but I don't know how to make you, Jane, I don't know how to make you a host.
Hi, Karin. Thanks so much for the presentation. It was great. Wonderful. I think that if you're on the Zoom account, if you see you scroll over Jane,
Yeah,
there's little ellipses right there. You can click on that. It should say make her host. And I think you did.
I just did it.
Perfect. Awesome.
Jane, are you host now?
Yes, hi, thank you. I am now host. I'm sharing my screen. Hello, everyone. Okay. This should be my screen now, and this is the drawmycacommunity.org website, which I'll give a brief demonstration of the site. Again, it was created recently by California's statewide database to facilitate the public's ability to participate in California's redistricting process. So anyone can use this tool to create public input to send to our California Citizens Redistricting Commission or their local redistricting commission like the Escondido Independent Redistricting Commission here. So it's been live for a little while now, and thousands have actually already used it and submitted their communities to the state. So some are familiar with it, and we hope that it will be a pretty intuitive and user-friendly site. Again, I'll just give a brief demonstration of a simple community of interest. There will be directions on the website as well as a tutorial here, which you can use if it's your first time using the site. I've used the site before, so I'm going to skip the tutorial and get started. So there are 16 languages, which you can select in the languages drop-down menu. It's also been developed with web accessibility standards in mind, and it's available anywhere that you can get on the internet. So you can use this on a computer or on your phone or any other web accessible device. So there are two options when you use the site. You can either log in, and to do that, you would need to sign up and create an account. This requires an email address and a password. And if you create an account, the main benefit is that you are able to save your drafts and come back to them later. So you can have a record of all of the projects or communities of interest you are working on. And you can also come back to them at later points. If you do not have an account or you do not wish to make an account, you can continue as a guest. For tonight, I'll just log in quickly to my own account and show you that experience as a user. I'm logged in now, and this is a new account, so I don't have any drafts or submissions yet, but if I did, they would be here. So the first step is to start a new map, and I'll try my best to make this clear by following my trackpad about how to use the tool. So I'm now starting a new project, and the first step is to describe my community. So I'll click the drop-down menu, and I'll be asked a few questions. The first one, most importantly, is to give your community a name. So for tonight's demonstration, I'm going to talk about my hypothetical community a little further away from Escondido in Berkeley, California. So my community, I'm going to call it the Ashby-Bart commuters. So the next question is to tell them about our community. So my community, I say that our shared interests are the cleanliness, maintenance, and affordability of the Ashby-Bart station, which is, BART is the Bay Area Rapid Transit train system in the Bay Area. So I say that we all use the station to commute to work daily. So that is my community of interest, and that would count as a social interest because of transport as being the thing that's bringing us together, this BART station. These next two questions are optional. One of them says, are there nearby areas you want to be in a district with, nearby areas you don't want to be in a district with, why or why not? So that gives space for a little bit more information about the community and how it relates to other communities. So again, this one's optional, but for Ashby-Bart commuters, we're going to say that we want to be in a district with the downtown Berkeley BART commuters because we also sometimes use that station. So that's just an example of, how one could relate to another community of interest that might be being submitted. And so the next step is to click on the drop-down menu for step 2, draw my community. So now I'm going to zoom in to find my community on the map on the right. And you can zoom in using the plus button and then just clicking and dragging it around the map until you visually find it. You can also use the search bar to search for a specific location. I'm zooming into Berkeley here in the Bay Area. One useful thing about the map is that obviously you can see street names and certain features on the map. You can change this to be a different base map if you would like to see other layouts that might be more useful. So topographical could show you, where the parks are if you wanted that to be part of your community. But I'm gonna keep it on this one and zoom in. So here's Ashby Avenue. That is where my community is. So I'm just gonna draw right here around the BART station. And I'm gonna stop right there because that's where Rockridge BART is. So let's call this my community. Now, once I'm satisfied with the boundaries of my community, again, I can zoom in, zoom out, add large or small pieces to the boundaries. Let's say that's good. I can either submit it to the Citizens Redistricting Commission, that would go to the State Commission. I can also save it, and I'll save that as a draft. And now I'll see that the project that I just worked on is right here in my drafts. If I wanted to, let's say, send it to the Escondido Independent Redistricting Commission, or send it to myself, send it to a friend, or another community member to check it out, I can export it. So I'll go up to the right corner and click on the menu button, and then I can click export. Now I have the choice to name my file. So I'm just going to leave it with that name, but you can rename it and then select your file format. So there's 3 formats for exporting. There's a PDF, there's a shapefile, and then an equivalency file. So any of these could be submitted as useful public input or data points for the commission to look at and review the community of interest. So once I've saved it, this is what the example of what you would get if I were to export my community to PDF. I would have one slide being the picture that I had just seen on the map, and then the next one with some submission information that I had typed in. And so I could send that. I could also choose to send the Koi shape file. So this is an entire folder. It'll come as a zip, and it'll have a few different files in here. Note that if you want to submit this to the commission, you'd have to submit all of these files. That's how a shape file works. It needs all of them. And I could write up a little email like this to my local commission and send my files there. So just attaching the files to an email would be the best way to send the exported files to the local commission. So that's how I would be able to send it to Escondido. So hopefully that was clear. Again, there'll be more directions on the website for how to use the site. I can answer any questions. Hopefully that live demo was helpful to get an idea of what kind of data might be coming in from this tool and how it could be useful to the commission. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Karen.
Jane, do you want to explain what a shapefile is and what an equivalency file is?
Yes, I'm sure someone who is a data nerd could probably explain a little bit better than I, but it's basically something that, when we're importing, it allows redistrictors to import the files into our mapping software. And so people who are drawing lines or people who are reviewing the communities of interest could pull these into a live map and then look at them on a map. So the shapefile will allow you to do that. But if Karen, you want to give more details, that could be useful.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you so much, Jane. If you want to make me host again, then I'll go back to my my slides if I can find them. And Jane explained that exactly correctly. So these are basically electronic files that allow you to take these data and then map with them. And let me just get back to my training. And no, from current slide. Slideshow. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, here we go. These are electronic files as opposed to having a PDF, which is basically just a picture of the district. But having a PDF in your email, of course, if you want to submit something, is really useful because you can hand it to your neighbor and say, hey, I just drew my community of interest, or you can send it to somebody else and just say, hey, do you agree with this? And, if you are somebody who would like to map with your community of interest, then you would send yourself a shapefile, because then you can import it into your mapping software and you can create districts with it. One thing that's really important to remember here is that communities of interest are not districts. Communities of interest are usually a lot smaller than districts. They're basically just building blocks for districts. Oftentimes it's a neighborhood or so they don't have any requirements about how large or how small they have to be. So this is one of my last slides. So just to remind you one more time, do not use or consider the following to draw district boundaries: info on where the council members live, addresses of potential candidates, information about party registration or information about party political behavior. When you're drawing lines, this is of course not when you're doing a Voting Rights Act assessment, but that you would not be doing that. An expert would be doing that for you. And with that, I'm going to send this presentation over to Zach. And Zach, if you don't mind, I will just operate the PowerPoint for you. And you can just tell me when you want to see the next slide. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, totally fine. And if you want, you can make me the host. I can run the PowerPoint from our computer here if that would be that's totally fine as well.
I just don't know that I sent you this version of the PowerPoint.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Then we can just run with this one then. That sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks so much, by the way. Great presentation, very thorough. And commissioners, just want to go over with you guys, just for your awareness, the important thing is we're looking through and we'll walk through the timeline, but it's all related to the consent decree. So the consent decree maps out for us how we're going to do this and the timeline that we have to do this. And we had a pretty robust discussion during our last meeting about, do we want to do this after the census data is released, like in the combination of the fall and early next year? Or if we want to do this later, later at the beginning of 2022. And I've put together a timeline based off of what an early 2022 workshop method would look like for us. So that's what we're going to look at right now. So as we're having right now, the July redistricting workshop, as Karin mentioned, August 16th, the initial set of data is released. We won't really be working with that until September 23rd. Then what I would say would probably be a wise approach to take is, because the county and the state are both doing redistricting simultaneously, because they have primary elections that they have to deal with, and they have to submit their data. Right now, it looks like right now it's December, could be pushed back to January. If we push our hearings back to January, we're not going to be in competition with them, and it'll just allow us to have a little bit more of a highlight on our work that we're doing. With that being said, in January, we would host 6 public hearings for line drawing in geographically diverse areas. February, we'd do a preliminary plan that you file with my office, and then we'd have 3 public hearings for people to provide input on that preliminary plan. Then we'd submit that to the council, and then it's for the council to review, but also for the public to review. We'd have to have at least 1 public hearing on the recommended plan, and then the city council votes. And Karin, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, this will get down in a little more detail. Thank you so much. So here's the proposed timeline, and this is just a proposal, so we can adjust this how you see fit. But basically, we would start early January, January 6th. On a Thursday evening, we would have a public hearing, preferably in District Number 2. Then we go to January 8th, a few days later, on a Saturday, public hearing in District Number 1. Then we'd kick up to January 11th on a Tuesday, do a public hearing in District Number 4. Then January 13th, we'd have another Thursday hearing, public hearing in District 3. On January 18th, which is a Tuesday, we'd be in District 2. That's when we'd actually begin the line drawing. January 20th, which is a Thursday, we'd have a public hearing in District 1, potential line drawing as well. And then the commission would begin its work of finalizing the drafts and approving the preliminary plan. That would take place on the 25th and the 27th. And then we would submit that to my office basically the end of the month. So as you can see, that's going to make January 8th an extremely packed month for all of you guys. So that's why I want us to to kind of nail this down earlier so that way we can kind of plan our schedules accordingly. And also as part of this, we're going to be doing a very robust public outreach campaign. We actually have our communications team that's going to be helping us contract with an actual campaign consultant who can actually get out and do a substantial amount of outreach to our community. So we want to finalize these dates on the sooner schedule so that way we can begin mapping out how we're going to target each individual district. And that's why you can see we're going to bounce from district to district. And on that point, Juan actually did a great job. Commissioner Reynoso sent me a list of proposed district locations where we could actually have that. I'll pull that up in a second for you to see. And I have other locations that we can look at as well. So that's just a tentative timeline. Karin, if you might mind switching over to the next thing. So after we submit the preliminary plan to the city clerk's office, then we have to have 3 public hearings according to the consent decree. Those all take place in February. So you see we kind of slow things down, just 3 meetings and just kind of space them out nice and evenly. Then approve the recommended map at the end of February on the 24th. And Karin, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, thank you so much. Then we'd have that recommended redistricting map submitted to the city council in March. And there's a council meeting right now. We're going to have one scheduled on the 9th, so we want to have it then. Then they'd have a public hearing on the 16th. So at the 9th meeting, Chair Case and myself would basically present, and Karin would present the map to the council. Then we'd actually have it submitted to the public for them to review and have a public hearing on the 16th where people can come and say, hey, I don't like this, I like that, and then the council can kind of deliberate. Then on the 23rd, that's when the approval of the final map could take place. I'm intentionally making sure that we put this proposal to the council earlier. That way, if for some reason they reject it, we have some buffer, because we have a timeline right now of April 15th when we need the map submitted. So we don't want to cut this too close. So if for some reason the council rejects the final map on March 29th, the commission would then have a meeting to look at their changes they proposed or their issues they had with it. And then we would formally respond by having additional meetings. So if you won't mind going to the next slide, Karin, that'd be super helpful. Then we would basically kick it back to the council with any changes that we decided to make on the 6th. And then by the 13th, if they hadn't made a decision on the 6th, we'd have that last meeting on the 13th to get the map finally approved by the council, and then we're done. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So as you can see, majority of the work for the commission is really going to be taking place between January and March, and then we kick it to the council. If they're good with it, then it just gets approved. But if not, then you have to have another meeting or two. So that's kind of the proposed timeline. That is totally up for changing and modifying, but after looking at everything, that seems to be the most efficient way to get this done in a compact amount of time. So that's basically it for the timeline. And any questions for Karin, myself, for Jane, we're here to answer those for you. And just thank you guys so much. And Karin and Jane, thank you so much for everything as well.
Zach, I have a question about, I think that Jane showed us that you could send your map to the council, to the commission. Do we have a commission email that we'll be using?
We do have a commission email. It goes, so right now I receive it, it's districting@escondido.org. And I'll send you guys an email with that as well. And we could actually do it where I add you all your personal emails to that, so you're getting it in real time. But I'll make sure that I consolidate all the information I'm giving it to you guys, so you have all the communities of interest and have everything available. Yeah, totally. Any other questions? Yeah, Chair Case, yeah.
So just to be clear, just like, I know that there was a training in this.
Yep.
This is also like, right?
Totally. Yeah, so it's a kind of a both and. So what we kind of on the agenda, we've had the redistricting workshop, and now we're kind of did the timeline, and now you can make decisions as to how you want to proceed with timeline and other issues that might come up. And also, I know we talked about that one letter from the county that we can bring up in a little bit. So yeah.
So I have 3 questions. I told myself I wasn't going to say a word this meeting. Just try to be quiet, but that didn't work out. All right, so my first question is, we discussed previously the timeline and sort of us not conflicting with the county and the state, their efforts. I remember sort of the theme that I walked away with during that conversation was basically the bandwidth, right? We didn't want to there's just so much redistricting going on, people stop caring after a while. But my question was, I thought that we had the opportunity to go start our process before those two. So wouldn't that, like, why is this timeline more ideal than us starting earlier and just, you know what I mean? Take care of what you can take care of today instead of tomorrow, because you don't
Totally.
know what's gonna happen tomorrow.
Great point. So to answer that question, the way I would propose it for the consent decree, we're required to have those 6 public hearings, submit the preliminary map, then have 3 more public hearings. We can have as many workshops and meetings prior to that as possible. So Cara and I, we talked when we had the last commission meeting, it seems to be what would make the most sense is if we have the extra time to basically have all the information available, it's already been finalized, and then we can submit it to the public for them to review in a nice consolidated period of time. That's going to be a bit more efficient. If we do it at a bifurcated timeline, let's say, for example, we start in early October, we could host a couple of public hearings during that time frame, maybe 2 or 3 between October and early November, but then we get into holidays and then we get into the new year, and it feels like we would lose some of that momentum. And from my perspective, and from Karin, and then you can jump in as well, it seems like it would be more efficient if everything is just, this is basically redistricting month in Escondido, and that's how we advertise it and market it. I feel like it would personally lose some of that steam. It doesn't mean though that we couldn't have additional workshops like we're doing right now during the time between October through January, and that would be more of the educational phase. And right now, if we kind of use tonight as an example, well, you guys might have, I think I copied you on the email I sent a little while ago last week. On the 8th, there was a county redistricting meeting. On the 10th, there was a state redistricting meeting. Here we're on the 12th, we're doing a city redistricting meeting. And obviously we're at an evening meeting, you know, hopefully trying to accommodate people's schedules, but even then, you know, that the participation is you know, going to start to pick up, but it's limited right now from the public's perspective. So I think that because we have that compressed timeline that we can work with in January and still make our deadline of April, the county and the state are going to have a similar compressed timeline they're going to be operating with in October and November. So they're going to be hosting a ton of workshops and a ton of meetings. And I just feel like we would get kind of lost in the mix of that. That's just my thought, but it's ultimately your discretion. But Karin, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, but that's kind of, I know we talked quite a bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zach. I think this pretty much summarizes it. Just one more point to make would be that the county and the state, they have different deadlines. They, at this point, have to be done, you know, county has to be done mid-December and the state has to be done either, you know, toward the end of December or sometime early or mid-January. They're still trying to figure out what exactly their deadline is going to be. But essentially, we can't get ahead of them because we're all getting the data at the same time. And they're going to have an incredible crunch period. So there's going to be a lot going on. And as Zach said, there's going to be a lot of meetings on the state and on the county level to accommodate those schedules. Now, we're lucky in that we have, you know, we have some time because we don't have to be done until mid-April. And so that's kind of opening things up a little bit for us. People only have so much bandwidth, you know, there's just only so much redistricting you can do. I mean, if you look at all the stuff that's going on already, it already seems like a full-time job for community members that want to participate. You know, you add this one to, you know, they all have to weigh what falls by the wayside, essentially. So thank you, though.
Got it. So the real issue is that Christmas break then, and the fact that we have like 3 months longer than them, just put it instead of stretching it out. Okay, I got it. And then my next question is, I saw on the timeline for after we submit our map, our draft map, that there's going to be 3 public hearings, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed that they were in District 2, 3, and 4. Is there any reason, any particular reason why District 1 is out of that, or is it just there's only 3 spots?
Yeah, so in the first 6 public hearings, I tried to make it as equal. Obviously 9, we can't divide it. So we have more meetings happening in District 1 during the first 6 public hearings. And then I just kind of did the rotation of, you know, then it went to 2, 3, and 4 for the 3. So that no rhyme or reason other than just wanting to kind of have things balance out a little bit. And just to double check. So for the first 6, it goes D2, D1, D4, D3, D2, D1. Then it kicks back to D4, D3, D2. So it just, yeah, it just kind of follows that pattern.
Awesome. And then my last question was, at the end of the timeline, our submission to city council. And then in the event that they rejected it or asked us, propose some changes, right? I just want to be clear in the fact, and at least how I understand it, they can propose amendments, they can reject or whatever, but ultimately, what happens if you said it was the 15th?
The April 15th, yeah, that's our
Okay,
deadline.
so April 15th, let's say we have that meeting April 13th.
Mhm.
We're like, okay, this is what we came up with, and they're like, no, we're not satisfied with that. What happens?
Yeah, so the consent decree spells out that the council can they can reject the initial map, the final draft map that you submit. Then they have to reject it in writing to you. Then we can actually make the modifications if you deem necessary. Ultimately, you have the final discretion. The council will have to stamp this. That they do have the ability to, block this. They could get in a legal protracted argument with us and do that. I don't foresee that happening, but because you're the Independent Redistricting Commission and they do have a vested interest in where these districts lie from an incumbent and political perspective, I would think the consent decree and the CVRA would be on the legal side of the Independent Redistricting Commission to validate your map as opposed to the council, standing in the way. So I think if they have any disagreements, that's going to have to be worked out, and Karin can work on the specific census data with us to see if it needs to be modified in any way, shape, or form. I don't think it's going to be anything substantial, but I ultimately, I believe at the end of the day, the Independent Redistricting Commission has the stronger legal footing in comparison to the council for the final say of the map. But I could be incorrect in that, Karin or Jane, if you have any insight, but that would be if I don't know of a jurisdiction where we've had a protracted issue like that, where the council has ultimately.
Okay, so technically all this could happen and we get to the deadline and there's an issue.
Yeah.
Right, and then we would, obviously that's very unlikely that would happen, but if that did happen, then what happens? The districts remain the same?
No, well, until it's legally and until everything is solidified within the court system, if we go through judicial process, we have to get the city attorney involved. I would think that if we get to a point on March 29th, is that when? Yeah, March 23rd, if the council rejects the map, then the city attorney's office is going to come in and we're going to spell out a really clear plan and the council will be advised by the city attorney as well as to what they need to do. So I don't foresee an impasse, but it is important to kind of have a contingency in place. But I think we'd be entering into slightly uncharted legal territory at that point. But my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but my opinion would be that the law is on the Independent Redistricting Commission side as opposed to the council on this, because they're the ones whose districts they have a vested interest in keeping them the same if there was like any sort of legal argument there.
Right, for sure. Nobody wants any of that. I just want to know, the extent of what could happen and the probabilities of that. So that's why you wanted to fit in that little bit of extra buffer time at the end.
Yeah.
In case there's any issues.
Totally. Yeah. I just kind of want to foresee, prevent any sort of big issues from coming up. Yeah.
Cool. That's all I have.
Cool. Any other questions from other commissioners, for Karin, for Jane, for myself? No? All right. Well, fantastic. You guys all the way around. Real quick, since one did send this, I'm going to pull up something on the screen. I just want you guys to see, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we might talked a little bit at the last commission meeting about where we specifically want to have these meetings take place, so we're getting adequate representation and attendance from people throughout the city. So Juan did a great job. He submitted some great alternatives for us to look at. As you can see on your screen, different districts and different schools. Then some different community centers like a wellness center in district number 3, and then some potential outreach events at different events like the Grand Avenue Festival, JC's Christmas Parade. So I just want to let you know, as I'm coming up with these different, so if we adopt this timeline that we went out with, I can start integrating some of these potential locations. And if you have other ones that you want to send my way, I'm happy to do that. I also met with our Deputy City Manager and Director of Community Services, and Joanna Axelrod says that we have some city-owned facilities that we could potentially use. And one of the unique features that we're offering that very few are doing is we're doing this hybrid model as you like Zoom and attending in person. So to have all these meetings take place at these different locations, they have to accommodate that as well. One of the benefits of maybe hosting them at city-owned facilities is we already have them retrofitted with, projectors and all those kinds of things. So just taking that into consideration, but I wanted to let you know that we want to make sure that we're reaching into the community as effectively as possible. And if you have any suggestions on other places that you think would be good, just let me know. And basically at our next meeting, I'll have the actual locations for you to look at. But I just want to share that with you. So, and if any other questions on that, if you have any future agenda items that any of the commissioners want for our next meeting, and we can kind of talk about when you want to have our next meeting as well.
Yeah, if I can actually throw one out there.
Sure.
Can we get some more, not necessarily training, but more information on the Brown Act?
Oh, sure.
Because I think that everyone here is, cares about what we're doing and is going to work really hard as this thing picks up. And the last thing that I would want to see was something to be tarnished because of a conversation on the way to the parking lot.
For sure.
Right.
Right after, so tomorrow I can email you. We have a whole training pamphlet that goes over the Brown Act and all the rules and responsibilities of a commissioner, and we can go in a little more depth. Just kind of a 30,000 foot view. We talked very briefly about this at the first commission meeting. Just do not communicate with a majority or a quorum of the council outside of public hearing meetings. That's basically like the biggest thing. There's a lot more that goes into it as well, but just for our awareness, that's super, super important. I'm glad you brought that up. So I'll make sure that's on the agenda for the next one. Yeah. Any other items?
Do we need to vote on the timeline now? Or?
It would be helpful. Yeah, I was going to say if you guys wouldn't mind adopting that, and that could change if at our next meeting, but that would be the one I would operate with, especially as we're doing our public outreach and starting to secure facilities and locations. So yeah.
We're going to vote on it. Would you mind just pulling it up real quick?
Sure. Let me.
And while he does that, what do you guys think about, I think I saw the list of places. I think the farmer's market would be great. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I like all those events.
The only issue I have is technology at the farmer's market.
Okay.
I think we can do like get out the words.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it's
So
a
I saw
great-
there was something, you had a booth, suggested a booth for the Christmas parade or something like that.
Yeah. So the public hearings would take place in more like a structured kind of formal setting, but there would be public outreach that we would do, passing out pamphlets, flyers, and pointing people to the Draw My Community of Interest mapping software, those kinds of things at different events like a farmer's market. Here's the tentative timeline. And obviously I know I'm putting you guys a little bit on the spot because you might already have travel plans and things like that. So I apologize. But if you have any days or evenings, like I chose Tuesdays and Thursdays, we can't really host many of these meetings on Wednesdays because of city council. And I just figured Mondays and Fridays, people either having 3-day weekends or it seems like Tuesdays and Thursdays are probably our best time to do most of our weekday meetings. And then Saturdays, obviously want to at least have one of them. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or any conflicts because we can adjust this accordingly.
Are these all at 5 o'clock?
So they would, I would say we can change the time frame. I haven't set the specific time because I want to talk to you as to what you think would be best. I would think it'd be beneficial no matter what after 5 o'clock, just like our council meetings start at 5, just to, the average 9 to 5 work day to maximize public participation. We could start later than that. Saturday, probably like a Saturday late morning, sort of a meeting. But yeah, I don't know if you have a preference as to time wise, but these meetings will probably last 2 to 3 hours each, could go longer, but I think that would be about the average, timeline for most of these. So I don't know if that factors into your thinking.
Zach, when it says begin line drawing, that would be us as a group beginning to draw lines after January 18th. So we'd have to have another meeting in there, or is that something that?
So that would be where the meeting, that you would be doing it during the public hearing. So it'd actually be happening simultaneously. Yeah, so to give some context, prior to my time as city clerk here, I was city clerk in the city of Oceanside, and we did not have a redistricting commission. We went through the redistricting process, and the first couple of meetings were held where we actually just received public input, got the communities of interest, and then towards the like 3/4 of the way through, then we started drawing the maps in the actual meetings themselves. So the reason why I think it's important is that although we are having these in different districts overall, the members of the public can attend any of the meetings no matter what. So they are kind of happening, they're building on each other during the course of the meeting. So it's not that we're only having a District 2 meeting just for District 2 residents. So the reason I bring that up is that by the time we're line drawing, anyone can come and start giving their input on that. So yeah, Karin, I don't know if any insight on that as well. Oh, cool. Sounds good. Any other questions?
Do you remember what the specific number that the consent decree calls upon for a number of meetings, both pre-line drawing and post-line drawing? I know that was earlier in the presentation, but
Yeah, it's six public hearings that happen. So we have to have six public hearings before the line. I'm sorry, 6 public hearings before we submit the preliminary map to myself, to the city clerk's office, and then 3 public hearings after the fact. So 9 public hearings, but then we have the other commission meetings and council meetings that factor into that. I think it's a total of about 11 meetings altogether. Any other questions?
I don't have a question. I just have a quick comment.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned the times. I just want to get like a feel for what you guys think is a good time. You know, a lot of times the meetings start at 5 o'clock, but we're here, we're here talking about the franchise, and the disenfranchised tend to be, working jobs, just getting off work at 5 o'clock. So in my mind, yeah, it may be, I'm not going to say inconvenient, but I think that 6 o'clock would be more convenient for the electorate, basically. So I wanted to see what you guys thought about that instead of like 5 o'clock. That's it. All right.
My only thing, as long as it's consistent, that's all I ask, please.
All right, so we'll plan 6 o'clock for the public hearings throughout the course of it. Sounds good. For the Saturday meeting, do you guys have a preference on that at all as far as the time?
10 a.m.
Hi, Zach. This is Commissioner Dawn. I would like
Oh, hi.
to. Yeah, I am so sorry. I was coming back home late from work, and so that's why 6 o'clock is wonderful. Thank you.
Great, great.
On Saturday, I would like to see if we can do early, like around 9 o'clock. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that works too, because then you would be hopefully done by lunchtime, right?
At 12.
9 to
Yeah.
noon. Yeah.
I just had Zach, I had also a quick comments regarding Tuesdays in January. I don't have any issue with that. The only thing that I'm worried is because Tuesday is also the day when the planning commissions are meeting as well.
Yeah, what we could do is I could look at it and see, for those times when there is a Tuesday where the planning commission meets, if maybe we have a Monday evening meeting as opposed to a Tuesday evening meeting. The planning commission hasn't set their calendar yet for 2022, so I can work with Adam Feinstone and see if they have tentative dates and kind of work around that, if that would be preferable. So for context, Commissioner Dowan serves on the planning commission and they meet on Tuesday evenings. So if the commission is amenable, if I find those dates, generally the planning commission meets twice a month. And if that's the case, would you be amenable to me moving those meetings to Monday evenings? If we had to do that, would that be okay? Any opposition to that, or?
I'm open to that. My only thought is that there are holidays in January on Mondays.
Yeah,
So just
yeah,
making
that's
sure they don't conflict.
Yeah. So trying to avoid the holidays then. So if it's okay with you, I'll kind of just try and piece together the calendar and then, put that together. But if it's okay, if I have tentative approval with the proposed calendar, and then if I can adjust maybe 1 or 2 of the Tuesday meetings, not interfering with a potential holiday, I'll do that.
I would vote yes for it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, thoughts?
Yes, I have one other thought. So we have 9 hearings, and we have 2 in every district except for one district, which is the D2, that's getting 3. Would it be possible to assign that last district to a more neutral location somewhere in the center of it? Maybe the public library, for example, that is very near the boundary. I can't remember which boundaries, but it's like at the intersection of 3 districts. So I feel like that would be a good place for that 9th district in order to ensure that each district gets 2 locations.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If you guys. Great. All right. Any other questions, thoughts? If it's all right, then would you guys mind taking a formal vote on this to, kind of get it formalized and all that?
I'll motion to approve this timeline.
Cool. If you guys don't mind, just, vote by raise of hands. All right, motion approved. And Amy, how do you, Commissioner Dowan, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right, motion approved 7-0. All right, and then before we close up, any last future agenda items that you guys can think of, or anything else you want brought back for discussion? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one. It would be great for us to start discussing that outreach strategy in the fall of like which events we should be going at, maybe some themes or visions for what that redistricting month branding may look like, or what messaging we want to use for us to start thinking through what that comm strategy is. That would be helpful.
I think it would also be good to hear what the approach of I think you said that you guys are hiring like a campaign specialist or something, what their approach would be. And
Definitely. So the RFP just went out. It's looking like it's going to be somewhere between $15,000 to $20,000 total for their work. We are going to receive 3 bids back, and then once we have selected someone, then we can bring them to you to do a formal presentation and then get your feedback to them as to where you think they should be meeting. So on that note, that leads in perfectly to when would you like to have our next meeting as a commission? I know it's July 12th right now. If you want, we could shoot for another one in about a month from now. It'd probably be wise to do it, I think, sometime in August, because we'll probably start doing outreach in September and October. So I don't know if you have a preferred day or timeline that works best. We just do it exactly a month from now or 6 weeks from now. I don't know if there's a strong feeling, but also with travel schedules, I want to be mindful of that too.
Myself, I would like it later in August because schools are starting.
Mhm.
And so that's going to be a big thing for a lot of people.
Definitely. All right, so potential dates that are out there, let's see here. So like August 23rd is a Monday, that could potentially work. The 24th, a Tuesday evening. I don't know if there might be a planning commission meeting that night, so I take that back. So maybe the 23rd or even August 30th. Those would be kind of later, August. I don't know if either of those are preferable. August 23rd, cool. So with that being the case, do you want to do that at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock? These meetings obviously are slightly different than our public hearings because it's just going to be us talking, going over things, but whatever you prefer, I'll schedule it. 5, all right, so we'll schedule that for August.
Wait, can Amy make 5 o'clock though? Just double checking with.
Yes.
Yes, okay, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
just
Yes.
wanted to make sure
Thank
Amy
you.
was able to make it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Cool, guys. Well, excellent work. Real quick thank you to Karin and to Jane. Immense gratitude for all your work putting together that thorough presentation. It was very well done, and I hope it was helpful for the commissioners. And if anything else, I think we're good. I think we can adjourn the meeting if that's fine with you guys. All right, cool. Well, thanks so much. Hope you have a great night. And to everyone who watched online, thank you so much as well. Hope you have a good night. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.